Ultra Instinct was never meant to be mastered. That assumption is the first thing Dragon Ball quietly dismantles the moment Goku steps into this state. Not through spectacle, but through consequence. Because the instant Ultra Instinct appears, the logic that once rewarded effort, discipline, and willpower begins to distort. Control no longer guarantees survival. Strength no longer outweighs cost. And every second spent inside this form accumulates a debt that stamina alone cannot repay. This is not a transformation that amplifies who Goku is. It actively erases parts of him, compressing instinct, identity, and intent into something dangerously efficient. One long decision, followed by silence. Then motion. And from that point forward, the meaning of power in Dragon Ball quietly shifts. For most of the series, growth follows a familiar rhythm. A wall is hit. Training sharpens the body and mind. Transformation arrives as proof that effort mattered. Even gods obey this structure. Super Saiyan forms, divine ki, perfected techniques, all of them still respond to persistence and control. Ultra Instinct rejects that framework entirely. It does not reward effort. It bypasses intention. It functions precisely because thought is removed from the equation. The body moves before identity can intervene. And that difference is not cosmetic. It is philosophical. When Goku first touches Ultra Instinct, it does not arrive as a triumphant evolution. It arrives as a failure state. His body, pushed past limits it cannot consciously manage, shuts the mind out to survive. The technique is not chosen. It is triggered. That distinction matters. Because from that moment on, Ultra Instinct stops being about winning and starts being about endurance. Not physical endurance, but existential endurance. How long can Goku remain present while something else pilots his body? This is why Ultra Instinct feels unsettling even when it looks flawless. Movements are clean, efficient, almost merciless. There is no excess emotion, no flourish, no personal signature. The punches land because they must, not because Goku wills them to. Against opponents like Jiren, this creates a strange imbalance. The stronger Ultra Instinct becomes, the less recognizable Goku feels inside it. Victory is possible, but ownership is unclear. And Dragon Ball has always treated ownership of power as sacred. Power scaling breaks here not because Ultra Instinct is stronger than everything else, but because it ignores the usual exchange. Traditionally, power costs effort up front and pays off later. Ultra Instinct reverses that. It grants peak performance immediately, then charges the price afterward. Muscles tear. Ki collapses. Consciousness lags behind the body. The form borrows time Goku does not have and demands repayment without negotiation. That is why mastery becomes such a dangerous word in this context. Attempting to master Ultra Instinct implies control. But control is the one thing this state resists. Angels can use it effortlessly because they exist without internal conflict. Their identity is stable, static, detached. Goku is none of those things. His strength has always come from desire, curiosity, hunger, attachment. Ultra Instinct suppresses all of that. The more he stabilizes the form, the more he risks flattening the very traits that make him adaptable. What looks like refinement is actually subtraction. This is where the hidden meaning sharpens. Ultra Instinct is not a ceiling. It is a warning. A glimpse of what happens when efficiency replaces intention entirely. The body becomes perfect, but the self becomes optional. That is why prolonged use does not feel empowering. It feels isolating. Goku fights alone inside his own skin, watching something faster, colder, and more precise borrow his strength. Even later interpretations that frame Ultra Instinct as a technique rather than a form do not escape this tension. Separating it from transformation is not about safety. It is about containment. Limiting how much of himself Goku is willing to surrender at once. Each adjustment, each variation, reflects a compromise between instinct and identity. Not progress in the traditional sense, but damage control. And that is why Ultra Instinct matters beyond any single battle or arc. It reframes what ultimate power looks like in Dragon Ball. Not a roaring declaration, but a quiet disappearance. Not rage or resolve, but absence. The strongest state Goku has ever reached is also the one that threatens to leave the least of him behind. The question is no longer whether he can win while using it. The question is how much of himself remains afterward, and whether the series is willing to let him cross that line again when the cost is no longer theoretical but already written into his body, his limits, and the way his fights now end not with celebration, but with stillness that feels heavier than defeat, because Ultra Instinct does not conclude battles so much as it empties them, draining momentum until all that is left is a figure standing where Goku should be, breathing, alive, victorious, and yet carrying the unmistakable sense that something essential has been deferred rather than resolved, a tension that follows him into every subsequent confrontation, reshaping how opponents perceive him, not as a warrior escalating toward transcendence, but as a variable that destabilizes the fight itself, bending rhythm and expectation until even overwhelming force begins to hesitate, unsure whether pushing harder will bring triumph or trigger a collapse that takes everything with it, including the one who stands at the center of that borrowed perfection, waiting for the moment when instinct finally demands a payment that cannot be delayed any longer and forces Goku to choose between continuing to move without thinking or reclaiming control at the exact instant when control may no longer be enough. That unresolved tension is what lingers long after the aura fades. Ultra Instinct leaves behind a vacuum where certainty used to sit. Enemies no longer read Goku as someone climbing toward a peak, but as a destabilizing force that warps the fight itself. Timing collapses. Strategy phrase. Power becomes unreliable not because it is weaker, but because its presence rewrites the conditions under which conflict normally resolves. When Goku enters that state, the battle stops being a contest of will and becomes a test of tolerance. How long can reality accommodate a fighter who is no longer fully participating in his own decisions? This is why Ultra Instinct never settles into the narrative the way Super Saiyan once did. Super Saiyan was explosive, emotional, but legible. It externalized rage, grief, and resolve. The audience understood its cost and its reward instantly. Ultra Instinct internalizes everything. There is no visible emotion to anchor to, no scream to signal transition. The shift is subtle, almost unsettlingly calm. And calm, in Dragon Ball, has always been more dangerous than fury. Calm implies inevitability. Against opponents built on conviction, ideology, or raw dominance, Ultra Instinct exposes a flaw that brute strength cannot patch. Jiren's absolute belief in power collapses when faced with an opponent who does not assert belief at all. Moro's absorption loses meaning when the target operates on instinct rather than intent. Even gods struggle to contextualize a fighter who is neither attacking nor defending in a traditional sense, but simply occupying the most efficient outcome moment by moment. Ultra Instinct does not overwhelm enemies. It nullifies their framework. Yet that same nullification rebounds inward. Goku's body adapts faster than his sense of self. Each activation widens the gap. The more seamless the movement becomes, the more delayed his awareness feels afterward. Recovery is not just physical exhaustion. It is disorientation, a subtle confusion that signals how close the form comes to functioning independently. Dragon Ball rarely spells this out explicitly, but it shows it in aftermaths. Collapsed posture, shaking hands, a silence that stretches longer than it should after victory. This is where the emotional weight lives. Ultra Instinct is not framed as aspirational mastery because mastery would imply harmony. And nothing about this state is harmonious. It is precise, yes. Effective, undeniably. But it is also extractive. It takes without asking. It borrows reactions before Goku consents to them. And while that makes him nearly untouchable in motion, it leaves him dangerously exposed the moment the flow breaks. Narratively, this positions Ultra Instinct as a ceiling that cannot be lived under permanently. Not because Goku is unworthy, but because the series understands what happens when protagonists lose authorship over their own actions. A hero who cannot choose is no longer progressing. He is being optimized. And optimization is a dead end for character growth. It produces results, not meaning. That is why later developments subtly pull away from the idea of perfect Ultra Instinct as an endpoint. Variations appear. Emotional reintroduction becomes necessary. Goku begins searching not for purity of instinct, but for integration. How to let instinct inform action without erasing intention entirely. This is not a downgrade. It is an acknowledgement of risk. The strongest possible version of Goku is not the one who moves without thinking, but the one who understands when not to surrender control completely. Ultra Instinct, then, becomes less about transcendence and more about boundary testing. How close can Goku approach that edge without falling into it? How much efficiency can he borrow before identity collapses under the weight of perfection? Every time the form appears, it carries that question forward unresolved. The spectacle distracts, but the subtext persists. And that is the hidden meaning most discussions miss. Ultra Instinct is not the ultimate answer to power scaling. It is a stress fracture in it. A reminder that strength without self-awareness becomes unsustainable, no matter how flawless it looks in motion. Dragon Ball does not present Ultra Instinct as the future of combat. It presents it as a glimpse of an outcome that cannot be inhabited for long, a state that exists to show what is lost when victory stops belonging to the one who achieves it, and instead belongs to a system that optimizes survival at the expense of choice, leaving Goku, and the audience, to sit with the uneasy realization that the most dangerous power he has ever touched is not one that threatens his enemies, but one that quietly threatens to make him unnecessary to his own fights. That realization reframes every future confrontation. Ultra Instinct no longer feels like a trump card waiting to be deployed, but like a fault line beneath the narrative, something that can be stepped on, but never comfortably stood upon. When Goku approaches a fight knowing this state exists, the tension is no longer about whether he can reach it, but whether he should. Power is available, but the cost is already understood. And understanding the cost does not make it lighter. It makes the decision heavier. This is where Ultra Instinct diverges from every prior breakthrough in Dragon Ball. Past forms solve problems. This one creates them. It introduces doubt into a series built on forward momentum. Even when Goku wins, the victory feels provisional, as if borrowed from a future version of himself that may not be able to afford it again. The body remembers. The limits remember. And the narrative remembers too, because each use narrows the space for escalation without consequence. Power scaling traditionally thrives on clarity. Stronger form, stronger opponent, higher stakes. Ultra Instinct muddies that clarity by decoupling effectiveness from sustainability. At full output, it eclipses almost everything. But at partial, imperfect, or restrained levels, it becomes something else entirely. A risk management tool. A last resort that must be weighed against long-term survival, not just immediate success. That alone changes how battles are structured. Fights stretch. Exchanges become probing rather than explosive. The absence of transformation theatrics shifts focus onto micro-decisions, positioning, patience, and restraint. Emotionally, this places Goku in unfamiliar territory. His optimism has always leaned on the belief that more effort leads to better outcomes. Ultra Instinct challenges that belief directly. Here, effort is irrelevant. Desire is noise. The best possible action happens only when he stops trying to make it happen. That is not a lesson that fits comfortably within his identity. It asks him to trust absence rather than intention, to let go rather than push forward. And every time he does, something essential feels temporarily suspended. That suspension is what gives Ultra Instinct its quiet menace. It is not flashy danger. It is erosion. A gradual smoothing away of edges until personality, strategy, and emotion risk becoming indistinguishable from background static. The form works best when Goku disappears inside it. And Dragon Ball has never treated disappearance as a neutral act. Characters who lose themselves to power rarely return unchanged. Viewed through this lens, Ultra Instinct is less a reward for reaching divine levels and more a mirror held up to them. Gods can afford detachment because they are not evolving. Mortals cannot. Growth requires friction, failure, and choice. Ultra Instinct removes friction. It removes failure in the moment. And by doing so, it threatens to remove growth altogether if relied upon too completely. That is why its presence continues to feel unstable even when visually controlled. The aura may sharpen, the movements may refine, but the underlying question never resolves. How much of Goku can be removed before the victory stops being his? Dragon Ball does not answer that outright. because answering it would require committing to a cost the story is not ready to finalize. Instead, it lets the tension persist, hanging over each activation like a silent countdown. And that lingering uncertainty is precisely why Ultra Instinct remains one of the most narratively dangerous ideas the series has ever introduced. Not because it breaks opponents, but because it threatens to break the contract between hero and power. The assumption that strength expresses identity. Here, strength suppresses it. And once that line has been crossed, it cannot be unseen. Every calm step, every perfect dodge, every efficient strike carries the echo of that contradiction, reminding us that the most unsettling evolution in Dragon Ball history is not one that asks how strong Goku can become, but how little of himself is required for the universe to keep moving forward.